Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a sutta study with Bhante Suddhaso, who's back, along with the rest of the residents from our mini silent retreat. So good to see everyone. Good to see Gita, Jens, Melody, Michael, Liz, and Elaine. Good to see you all, and that you've been coming so diligently this week. You've attended all the sessions so far. And good morning as well to friends who are watching but not typing anything in. So at this time, I'll pass things over to Bhante Suddhaso for today's sutta study.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. Welcome back to Sutta study. So always one of my favorite activities to read the Buddha's teachings and talk about them and discuss them. Today we'll be looking at a discourse from the Anguttara Nikaya called the Adipatteya Sutta. This is Anguttara Nikaya chapter 3, sutta number 40. Which is translated here as motivations. And the word adipatteya, just to talk a little bit about the literal meaning of this word, it comes from the word adipati, which means overlord. So that which is the master, the controller. So that which determines what we do. So in this case, it's translated as motivation because our motivation is what determines how we act. It's what determines what we do with our life. So the reason it's called this is because in the sutta, the Buddha is going to speak about 3 ways that we can be motivated to practice the Dhamma well. So I'll go ahead and read through the sutta. And as usual, I'll pause from time to time and give some explanations. And then at the end, I'll take any questions that you have. So please feel free to type in questions and comments at any time throughout the talk, and I'll go through those at the end. So the sutta begins. The Buddha says, monks, there are 3 kinds of motivation. What 3? Self-motivation, world motivation, and Dhamma motivation. In other words, we can be motivated by any of these 3 things. We can be motivated by ourselves, we can be motivated by the world, or we can be motivated by the Dhamma. So the first one, the Buddha says, monks, what is self-motivation? Here, monks, a monk in a forest or at the foot of a tree or in an empty dwelling. This is a common phrase that we find in the suttas, so being in the forest or at the foot of a tree or in an empty building. So this is, generally speaking, referring to when somebody is practicing meditation. So when they're either in solitude, in seclusion physically, in the sense that they're by themselves somewhere, or that they've chosen to seek out a peaceful place in order to practice meditation. So it says, a monk in a forest or at the foot of a tree or in an empty dwelling considers, I did not leave lay life and become a homeless renunciant for the sake of robes or food or housing or to become anything in particular. It was just because I was overcome by birth, decay, death, sorrow, grief, pain, depression, and anguish, overcome by suffering and enveloped in suffering. And I thought that perhaps a way could be found to end this massive suffering. So this is the first reflection that the person has. It's reflecting, well, why did I become a monk? Why did I leave behind lay life and become a monk? Did I do it because I wanted robes? Well, if so, that's pretty silly. It's a lot easier to get nice clothes when you're a lay person. Did I do it for the sake of food? Again, pretty silly. It's a lot easier to get nice food as a lay person. Did I do it for the sake of housing? Well, admittedly, we have a pretty nice house here at the monastery. It's this big old stone building that's quite lovely. But we're sharing it with a dozen other people, and that's maybe not so nice. So as a layperson, you can have maybe even no roommates at all, or only like one or two roommates that you really like. Not that I don't like my fellow monastery companions. They're all quite lovely people, but it's not always that way. No guarantee there. So you can have a lot more control over your housing as a layperson. And finally, he says, nor to become anything in particular. In other words, he didn't embark on monastic life as a career, like, I want to become an archbishop. He didn't embark on monastic life thinking, I want to be famous, or I want to be well-respected, or I want to be the best scholar, or I want to be this or that. So not wanting to be anything in particular. But rather it was just because of seeking a escape from suffering, wanting to find enlightenment, to attain spiritual perfection. So it's very wholesome motivation. So then the reflection continues. The monk says, if I were to seek out sensual experiences similar or inferior to what I left behind when I left lay life and became a homeless renunciant, that would not be appropriate for me. So in other words, again, with this basic recollection of why he became a monk in the first place, then this person, again, whether male or female or otherwise, says, if I were to seek out sensual experiences similar or inferior to what I left behind. So again, as a monastic, it's not particularly easy to have access to sensual experiences, to sensual pleasure. Our options for sensuality are quite limited. And generally speaking, what we have access to is inferior to what lay people can do. So the sensual pleasures that we have are, for the most part, inferior to what lay people can get. And even if we could seek out something similar, well, what's the point? We didn't become a monastic so that we could have a nice sensual life. We became monastics because we saw that sensuality was not of any benefit. We became monastics because we saw that sensuality does not lead to enlightenment. At best, it's a distraction. Worse, it's an obstacle, a hindrance, an impediment, a block on our path to awakening. So he says, if I get all wrapped up in trying to pursue things like I had as a layperson, I mean, one, it'll probably actually be worse than what I had as a layperson. So that I'm losing on both counts. I'm not getting the good sensuality of lay people, and I'm not getting the good spiritual practice of a sincere monastic. So it's basically a complete fail to become a monk and then spend all your time chasing after sensuality. Complete failure, losing position from day one. So reflecting on this way, the sutta continues. So motivated by himself, he abandons the unwholesome, develops the wholesome, abandons the blameworthy, develops the blameless, and maintains his purity. Monks, this is called self-motivation. So this is when, again, for example, maybe you're sitting in meditation and you start to have sensual thoughts about the kinds of nice things that you did as a layperson, the pleasant experiences you used to have. And maybe the mind starts to drift into thinking how nice it would be to try to have similar experiences as a monastic. How could I incorporate some more sensuality into my monastic life? But then one thinks, but that's not why I became a monk. If I'm interested in sensuality, then I should just be a layperson. It's a lot easier. It's a lot better. I'm a monk because I'm interested in something much higher, much superior to sensuality. So if I go off pursuing sensuality, then that's not appropriate. It's kind of like if you buy a really expensive appliance, maybe a really nice soy milk maker or a great chainsaw or something, and then you use it to pound in nails. You use it as a hammer. It's like, well, it's not really what its purpose is. It's meant for a much higher purpose, a much more precise purpose, much loftier purpose. You can use anything to pound in a nail, but a really well-tuned machine like that, it's meant for a specific purpose. And if we use it for something else, then we're missing out on a very valuable opportunity. So it's similar with monastic life. Monastic life is a very potent tool that we use in order to progress towards enlightenment as swiftly as possible. But if instead we waste our time pursuing ordinary pleasures, ordinary distractions, it's not particularly useful. It's just wasting our opportunity to live an inferior sensual life and an inferior monastic life. Then the next one, he says, monks, what is world motivation? Here amongst a monk in a forest or at the foot of a tree or an empty building considers, I did not leave lay life and become a homeless renunciant for the sake of robes or food or housing or to become anything in particular. It was just because I was overcome by birth, decay, death, sorrow, grief, pain, depression, and anguish, overcome by suffering and enveloped in suffering, and I thought that perhaps a way could be found to end this massive suffering. So it starts off with the same recollection, but then here it takes a different course. So rather than being motivated by oneself, instead the monk reflects, although I have become a renunciate in this way, I might think sensual thoughts, aversive thoughts, or cruel thoughts. So I actually like the honesty here. So the monk is like, okay, so I started this monastic life with very lofty goals, very exalted motivations. Well, let's be realistic. I've still got defilements. Even though I'm theoretically trying to attain enlightenment, I might still think greedy thoughts and cruel thoughts and aversive thoughts and so on. And he continues, however, there are a great number of people in this world. What is it, 8 billion these days? Something like 8 billion people in the world these days. There are a great number of people in this world. And among them are contemplatives and holy people who have spiritual vision and can read minds. They see others from afar, but others cannot see them even when they are close by. They know the minds of others using their own minds. They could know me in this way. Look, even though this gentleman faithfully left lay life and became a homeless renunciant, he lives all mixed up with evil, unwholesome thoughts. There are also powerful angels who have spiritual vision and can read minds. They also see others from afar, but others cannot see them even when they are close by. They also know the minds of others using their own minds. They also could know me in this way. Look, even though this gentleman faithfully left lay life and became a homeless renunciant, he lives all mixed up with evil, unwholesome thoughts. So this is the case of a monk who, the way he motivates himself is through reflecting on the fact that there are other beings in the world who can read minds, who could look at his mind and see all the unwholesome thoughts in there, who could see the thoughts of sensuality, the thoughts of cruelty, the thoughts of grumpiness and discrimination and hostility, and they would think poorly of him. So this is quite potent. So we were talking the other day about recollection of the devas, and this is actually one way that I like to recollect the devas. So whenever I'm tempted to engage in any kind of unwholesome behavior, whether by body, speech, or mind, sometimes I'll remind myself, oh, there are devas watching. There are devas who can see what I'm doing, hear what I'm saying, and who know what I'm thinking as well. There's no hiding. There are beings in the world who we cannot hide from. We cannot hide even our thoughts from. There are always beings who can know what we're doing, what we're saying, and what we're thinking. And many of those beings are fully aware of the Dhamma, fully aware of what's good and what's bad, of what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. And if they see what we're doing, what will they think? If a deva was reading your mind right now, what would they think? Or a monk, a telepathic monk, a psychic monk. If a psychic monk peeks at your mind, what would they think? There's a really amusing story from the biography of Ajahn Mun. So Ajahn Mun, one of these great semi-legendary figures from the Thai forest tradition, passed away a few decades ago. Fairly early in his teaching career, shortly after he started teaching other monks, he had developed some psychic powers. And he was living with an old monk who had become a monk later in life and maybe wasn't particularly motivated. So at one point, Ajahn Mun starts thinking, well, maybe I'll have a little peek at his mind and see how his meditation is going. So he has a little peek at that other monk's mind and sees that the other monk was just sitting there thinking all kinds of sensual thoughts. He's filled with sensual desire. So then Ajahn Mun went up to that monk and said, what are you doing? You're supposed to be meditating. Why are you there thinking all these disgusting sensual thoughts? And the old monk got so freaked out that he ran away and disrobed. So then Ajahn Mun reflected on this and realized that even if he can read other people's minds, it's not always a good idea to tell them about this. Anyway, but the point of this story, once again, is to reflect that, yeah, whatever's going on in your mind, there's a chance that somewhere right now, there's a highly advanced Buddhist monk reading your thoughts and thinking, oh, what disgusting thoughts that person is having. How vile, how despicable. So again, for some people, this is a way of motivating themselves. If there are others who can read my mind, well, then I hope they'll see something praiseworthy when they do. I hope they'll see something inspiring, uplifting. When they look at my thoughts, when they look at my mind, I hope they'll see that it's bright, it's wholesome, it's good, it's pure. So let's try to make it that way. So the sutta continues. He thinks unrelenting energy will be initiated, unblurred mindfulness will be established, the body will be tranquil and undisturbed, the mind will be concentrated and unified. So, motivated by the world, he abandons the unwholesome, develops the wholesome, abandons the blameworthy, develops the blameless, and maintains his purity. Monks, this is called world motivation. So this is being motivated by the other beings in the world. And in particular, motivated by the thought that there are spiritual practitioners and celestial beings who can see what we're doing, hear what we're thinking, and know hear what we're saying and know what we're thinking. So this also can be a very potent way of motivating ourselves to practice well. Then the third one says, the Buddha says, monks, what is Dhamma motivation? Here, monks, a monk in a forest or at the foot of a tree or in an empty dwelling considers, I did not leave lay life and become a homeless renunciant for the sake of robes or food or housing or to become anything in particular. It was just because I was overcome by birth, decay, death, sorrow, grief, pain, depression, and anguish, overcome by suffering and enveloped in suffering. And I thought that perhaps a way could be found to end this massive suffering. So again, the same opening recollection, but here it takes another track. The monk then reflects, the Dhamma is well expounded by the fortunate one, visible, timeless, apparent, transformative, to be personally experienced by the wise. I have co-practitioners who know and see. So that means people who have attained some stage of awakening. So those who know and see. That's usually taken to mean those who have made really substantial progress in their path until they have some kind of deep, direct knowledge of truth. So continues, as a renunciant in such a well-expounded system of teachings and trainings, if I were to live lazily and negligently, that would not be appropriate for me. So this reflection then is reflecting on the preciousness of the Dhamma, the value of the Dhamma. It's recollecting on what a wonderful treasure we have in having access to the Buddha's teachings. What a wonderful opportunity we have to live a life in line with the Buddha's teachings. So if we were to waste this opportunity, that would be such a shame. So in the suttas, in many places, it talks about how rare it is to be a human, how rare it is as a human to hear the Dhamma, how rare it is as a human who hears the Dhamma to understand the Dhamma, how rare it is as a human who hears the Dhamma and understands the Dhamma to practice in line with the Dhamma. So we have this very precious opportunity which comes about only once every few eons, once every few billion years, hundreds of billions of years, we get this chance. So let's make the most of it. We don't know when we'll get this opportunity again. It might not be for a very, 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 very long time, a ridiculously long time. We're talking the lifespan of multiple universes, it might be, before we get this chance again. So let's make the most of it and really try to taste the truth of the Buddha's words for ourselves. So once again, it says, he thinks unrelenting energy will be initiated, unblurred mindfulness will be established, the body will be tranquil and undisturbed, the mind will be concentrated and unified. So motivated by the Dhamma, he abandons the unwholesome, develops the wholesome, abandons the blameworthy, develops the blameless, and maintains his purity. Monks, this is called Dhamma motivation. Monks, these are the three kinds of motivation. So then it ends with a short series of verses, as is common with the Anguttara Nikaya. So I'll read through the verses and talk a little bit about their relevance to the sutta, and then we can take any questions that you have. So it says, there is no secrecy in the world for one who does evil things. A person knows for themselves what is true and what is false. So first, this first line of the poem, there is no secrecy in the world for one who does evil things. A person knows for themselves what is true and what is false. Well, this is pointing to the fact that even if it's possible to hide what we do from other people, we ourselves know what we've done. We ourselves know whether what we do is good or bad, whether it's in line with truth or in line with falsity. We know for ourselves whether it's wholesome or unwholesome. But again, as was pointed out in the second of the motivations, there are also other beings who know what we're doing, who are aware of the choices that we're making, and who know whether what we're doing is good or bad. But here in the verses, the Buddha is pointing to our ability to know for ourselves. And so starting off with the self-motivation, we know for ourselves what's good and what's bad. So it continues, the goodness within you despises what it sees of you, and the evil within that you try to hide. So this also I find interesting because the Buddha is talking about the fact that we effectively have two minds. So we have the mind which is committed to wholesomeness, which he calls the goodness within you. And we have the part of our mind which is not committed to goodness, the part of our mind which is wrapped up in greed, hatred, and delusion. So it's kind of like the old stereotype of having the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. And they're all both trying to influence us. Well, it's actually similar, except that the angel and the devil are both us. They're both parts of our mind. They're within us. They're not sitting on our shoulder. They're inside our mind. So we motivate ourselves to do bad and we motivate ourselves to do good. We have both within us. And in the course of our Buddhist practice, we're trying to give more voice to the goodness within and less voice to the evil within. And only at the point of attaining awakening does the goodness within finally reach full power, full authority. Only then does the goodness finally completely push out the evil tendencies within our mind. Then it says, angels and Buddhas also see all the fools living unpeacefully in the world. So this I also find interesting. So this is a reference to the all-seeing ability of Buddhas, to their ability to see what people are doing, their ability to know what people are thinking. So he says, of course, devas can do this, but also Buddhas have the ability to know what's going through the minds of others, to know what others are engaging in. And notice, by the way, that Buddhas here is in the plural. So he's not just talking about himself, he's talking about all the Buddhas. And so normally when we talk about Buddhas, there's a tendency to focus just on Shakyamuni Buddha, who passed away 2,500 years ago. But it's helpful also to remember that there are countless other Buddhas throughout past, present, and future, including some that are presently alive and living in other world systems. So also recollecting that whatever we're doing with our minds, there could even be currently living Buddhas in other world systems who are aware and are perhaps not so impressed by what we're doing with our minds. Or if we're good practitioners, then they might actually be quite satisfied with what we're doing with our minds. But here it says, angels and Buddhas also see all the fools living unpeacefully in the world. So let's try not to be one of those. Let's try not to be one of the fools living unpeacefully. And so I should point out the word translated here as unpeacefully in Pali is Vissema. So Vissema has several different meanings. I spoke about this a few weeks ago in another sutta. So Sama has the meaning of peacefulness. It also has the meaning of goodness, in the sense of moral goodness. It also has the sense of something which is even or level, like a level road, an even piece of ground. So it's something that's very pleasant and easy to traverse. So the fools living unpeacefully in the world, so those who are living in a immoral way would be another translation, or those living in a rough, coarse, uncomfortable way. So these are all connected in their meanings. Then the sutta continues, therefore, motivated by oneself and by the world, a clever person should practice meditation. Motivated by the Dhamma, practicing according to it, a wise person committed to truth does not falter. So this again is just reiterating what was said previously in the sutta. So motivated by oneself and by the world. So both by one's own knowing of right and wrong, and also on the awareness that there are others who know what we're doing. Then we should practice meditation. We should cultivate our mind. We should make a sincere effort to make progress towards purity of heart. And motivated by the Dhamma, a wise person committed to truth does not falter. So this is also encouraging. If we make the Dhamma our banner, our guide, then we won't falter. We might make mistakes as we go along the path, but we won't lose our motivation. We won't lose our resolve. We'll always keep moving forward. Then it says, one who subdues Mara, overpowering the ender, contacts the elimination of birth through striving. So this is talking about attaining awakening. So subduing Mara. So this is subduing Mara in the sense of overcoming all of our own delusions, all of our own desires and delusions. And reaching the elimination of birth through striving is a direct reference to attaining full awakening. And finally it says, a wise person who knows the world in this way is a sage who cannot be defined in terms of anything. So I could actually give an entire Dhamma talk just on this final line, a sage who cannot be defined in terms of anything. What this is referring to is the fact that an awakened being cannot be defined in terms of the components of their body and mind. They cannot be defined as their physical characteristics. They cannot be defined as a personality or as a set of habits or a set of preferences. They can't be defined as anything at all because they've completely abandoned self-identity. They've completely abandoned attachment to any kind of sense of self. So they're not stuck anywhere in the world, which means they cannot be defined by anything in the world. And elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha says that this is the end of suffering. If you're not stuck to anything in the world, then nothing in the world can bother you. Nothing in the world has any power over you. So it's complete liberation, complete freedom, as one is not constrained in any way. So that's the end of this sutta, a relatively short sutta, so I don't have too much more to say. So at this time, if there's any questions or comments, we can go ahead and switch to Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we have a couple comments and questions. So Elaine's just sharing that she checked out Sati Saraniya that I had mentioned last night during the talk. Gita Jnana says, awesome, Bhante Suddhaso. I agree that devas can hear your thoughts, so one must always be guarded in one's thoughts.
Poor devas. That reminds me, once during a Q&A session, we were talking with my preceptor, Ajahn Pasano, about telepathy and mind reading. And he made the comment, he's like, yeah, there actually are a lot of monks who can read minds, but usually they don't want to. They don't want to look at your minds. It's so disgusting. Who would want to look at that? So he's like, you don't have anything to worry about. They're probably not peeking at your mind. They don't want to see that. Anyway, keep going.
And Melody says, Bhante, I can see suffering spirits, karma, and etc. The suffering spirits will be released and leave my body after a certain amount of time. But what does it mean to be able to see these? Thank you for answering.
So I wouldn't particularly worry about it. So if you can see suffering spirits, then wish well for them. Have loving kindness and compassion for them. Wish for them to overcome their suffering and to cultivate wisdom and serenity. Wish for them to be established on the path to awakening. What does it mean? Realistically, it probably means that over the course of past lives, you developed a certain affinity with the spirit world, a certain affinity with the kind of beings that live in that way, that have that sort of form. So it doesn't have any particular significance, actually. It doesn't really mean much of anything. Just like some people have a particular affinity with cats. So cats are drawn to them and they get along well with cats. And they understand cats better than other people. But that doesn't have any particular significance. It just means that somebody has an affinity with cats that they built up in past lives. So perhaps you have some kind of affinity with tormented spirits. Well, turn it towards the Dhamma. Use it as an opportunity to cultivate loving kindness and compassion. But don't put too much thought on it. It doesn't mean anything in particular. Okay?
And Gita asks, if one practices mindfulness, would this help in developing guarding our thoughts?
Yeah, you have to be mindful of what you're doing in order to restrain it. So cultivating a deep, sharp, and precise awareness of your own mind is necessary in order for gaining control over your own mind. So yes, mindfulness is very important, especially mindfulness of the mind itself. Also very important is Samadhi. So strong Samadhi makes it much easier to keep the mind under control. If you have weak samadhi, then even if you have a certain amount of awareness, you might find that you lack the strength, the mental strength needed. So samadhi is strength. So it's not to be set aside. Okay.
And Gita says also constant study seems to be very helpful. Jens asks, Bhante, can you talk about the role of faith in motivation? It seems it would be part of Dhamma motivation.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it runs through all of this. So all of it starts actually with faith. So somebody who's overcome with suffering and then recognizes that there is a way out of suffering. There is a path to enlightenment, which leads to freedom of suffering. And by leaving behind the sensual life of a layperson and committing to monastic life, then it's easier. It's easier to cultivate the path to awakening. So faith is present right from the start under all three of these motivations. So faith that the path is worth following because it leads to full enlightenment. That's always there. So it's strongest perhaps in the third one, because the third one is built specifically around faith in the teachings of the Buddha. So Dhamma motivation is built around faith in the teachings of the Buddha, the validity and preciousness and potency of the Dhamma. But faith is a component in all three of these kinds of motivations. Okay.
And Gita is just saying, thank you for sharing the sutta. It's very nice to see you, Bhante. And Melody also gives thanks for your answer. And if there are any more questions, feel free to type them in. If there's any live questions as well, feel free to ask.
Yes, in the back, go ahead.
What's the distinction between awakened, enlightened, or liberated? Or are those terms interchangeable?
In Buddhism, so Internet's asking what's the difference between awakened, enlightened, and liberated, or are they interchangeable? In Buddhism, those three terms are effectively interchangeable. So each one comes from a different Pali word, but and each one has its own connotation, its own emphasis. So awakened is the word bodhi, which comes from the root buj, which literally means to wake up. So what that's pointing to is the metaphor that all of us ordinary people are dreaming right now. We think this world is real, but it's a dream. It's a fabrication of our own mind. It's not quite real. So a Buddha is someone who's woken up from this dream and who sees reality as it actually is. So that's the implication of the word awakening. So enlightenment, there's actually a few different Pali words which variously get translated as enlightened. So it depends upon which word you're looking at. But actually nibbutta, which is the past participle of the word nibbana, is a very good one for that. Which it has a few different meanings. One is cooled off, in the sense that the fires that burn the mind have cooled off and gone out. So there's that implication of serenity, of deep peacefulness in the mind. Another meaning of the word nibbana or nirvana, another meaning of that is freedom from craving. So all the craving is gone from the mind, which again has the sense of peacefulness, of contentment, of happiness. So enlightenment is actually not really related to either of those meanings. But enlightenment is a word which is well known in English, so gets wrapped into Buddhism pretty easily. The Buddha does use light as a synonym for wisdom, and as a synonym for attaining enlightenment in a few places. So the word aloka literally means light. The Buddha uses that to refer to the arising of wisdom. So aloko udapadi from the Dhammacakka Sutta is light arises in the mind, the light of wisdom. Liberation in Pali is vimutti, which means released, set free. So we're free from the entrapment of our own defilements, the entrapment of our delusions. So our defilements are like being pulled around on a leash. So we're not really under our own control. We're just being pulled around by our craving for this and aversion towards that. And delusion is like being caught in a maze. We're just constantly running around in this maze, which doesn't make any sense. So delusion has this feeling of entanglement, of entrapment. So when we let go of our delusion, then we're free. Like you're out of the maze. You're no longer caught in that confusing web. So these are different connotations, but they're all pointing at exactly the same experience. It's more like different aspects of the same thing. Okay.
And there's a couple of questions online that popped up. So Liz asks, so if Buddhas and Devas have the ability to know all minds, and all sentient beings have the potential to be Buddhas, then does it stand to reason that we're all of one mind, and higher levels of enlightenment allow access to the one mind?
Too much thinking. So what's the value in going through this line of thought? So there's an interesting, a few interesting places in the suttas where the Buddha points out that to say all is one is a mistake, but also to say everything is a plurality, in other words, that it's made up of a bunch of separate objects, is also a mistake. So it's not quite accurate to say we're all one mind, but it's also not quite accurate to say that we are separate minds. Neither one is a correct statement. Both seems correct from a certain angle, but is not correct from another angle. Okay?
And Skydiver Free Flyer asks, Bhante, in what state of mind does one not accumulate karma or accumulates neutral karma? Should our minds be made pure before making any type of action, or at least have pure intentions?
So the state of mind in which you make no karma is full enlightenment. Prior to that point, you're always making karma of one sort or another. There's no getting around it. As long as there's a sense of self, the sense of self is what karma sticks to. Actually, it's the other way around. So it's not necessarily karma sticking to a sense of self, but rather because we have a sense of self, then we stick to karma. So it's interrelated, the sense of self and the adherence to karma. So an awakened being has no sense of self, therefore they don't stick to any karma, and no karma can stick to them. As for the second part of your question, yeah, absolutely, you should try to purify your mind before doing any action. Try to make every action you do come from a wholesome mind, wholesome intentions, with clarity of purpose, clarity of motivation, clarity of context. And try to be really clear about the potential consequences of your actions. This is a refinement of motivation. Which is considering what are the potential implications of what I'm doing? What are the potential side effects of what I'm doing? Yeah, definitely. Always try to purify your mind before doing anything.
And Liz asks, does forgiving oneself for an unwholesome action eliminate the bad karma for that action?
No, but it creates more good karma, which helps to dilute the bad karma. The Buddha gives the simile of a lump of salt. He says, if you have a lump of salt and you put it in a little bowl of water, a little glass of water, then the water tastes very salty. But if you take that same lump of salt and you throw it in a huge river or a huge lake, then the water doesn't taste salty at all. The salt is still there, but it's so greatly diluted that you can't even taste it. So in the same way, if you've done something bad, then the way you overcome that is by generating so much goodness that the bad karma is diluted. And one of the ways that you dilute the bad karma is through repentance and forgiveness. So people from a Protestant background might dislike the word repentance, but it's actually quite a useful way of reflecting. So repentance is recognizing that we've done something unwholesome and vowing not to do it again. It's actually a very, very good thing to do, extremely wholesome thing to do. And forgiving oneself means that we don't harbor resentment or aversion towards ourselves. It's recognizing that we're delusional, we're mixed up, we're confused, we're full of defilements. So that means we make mistakes. Unenlightened beings make mistakes. One thing that's helpful to remember, by the way, is that the Buddha forgives us instantly. Whenever we make a mistake, we instantly have the Buddha's forgiveness. Because the Buddha understands that we're just a delusional being. And delusional beings do crazy things. That's kind of what we do. That's our nature. Just as it's the nature of a cat to try to kill small animals. They might try not to, and sometimes they succeed in not doing it. But in the same way, it's the nature of delusional beings to make mistakes. So Buddha knows that and recognizes that and doesn't hold any grudge towards us on account of it. So we should try to have that same state of mind towards ourselves. It's like, oh, of course I screwed up. I'm delusional. Delusional people screw up. And I'm going to try to do better. Because I'm trying to be an awakened being. And awakened beings don't screw up. They don't do unwholesome things. Okay?
All right. Thank you, Bhante. That was the final question of the morning. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today for a sutta study. You can join us this evening at 7:30 p.m. New York City time for our monk chat with a panel of monastics here at Empty Cloud. And as usual, Tan Santi will be back next week. He'll be taking over the channel while everyone else is on another short retreat. So thanks again for joining us. If you're in the area tomorrow morning, I believe we're having alms round at Montclair Farmers Market. So we'll be there from 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Stop by if you can. And we can end the stream with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And enjoy the rest of your day.